Nazi regime orchestrated the genocide of 6 million Jews. The Holocaust was an unfathomable period of darkness. Amidst all these horrible acts, a sunshine of hope was looking over the Jewish people. Today, we'll be talking about the brave hero amongst us, named Raoul Wallenberg, whose bravery is responsible for saving thousands of Jewish lives. There was one ray of light of a man, a Swedish diplomat called Raoul Wallenberg. This man successfully pulled off one of the greatest humanitarian feats in history. His light shone the brightest when he saved tens of thousands of Hungarian Jews from imminent death. The unparalleled courage in the face of evil is unquestionable, but how much power does one man need to have to change the course of history? What was special about Raoul Wallenberg? This is the story of the savior of Budapest. The 4th of August 1912 was unlike any other day in Lidingö, Stockholm. It was the day a child was born into one of Sweden's most prominent families, the Wallenberg family. They were known for producing generations of bankers, diplomats, administrators, and statesmen. A savior wasn't part of the route young Wallenbergs were expected to take. Because Raoul's father died before he was born, his grandfather Gustav Wallenberg had to assume the job of raising him. He was a diplomat like many of his relatives, and he instilled in young Raoul a global mindset. It is through this tutelage and practice that Raoul traveled widely and learned several languages. Raoul went on to serve briefly in the Swedish military and spent some time in Paris. He later studied architecture at the University of Michigan and graduated with honors in 1935. Upon returning to Sweden, he took a job at a Dutch bank in Haifa, Palestine. That was where he first encountered Jewish refugees fleeing Nazi persecution in Germany. In Raoul's words, it was a deeply moving experience that sowed the seeds for his later humanitarian work. The early 1940s brought him closer to Nazi-occupied countries through his work for a Stockholm-based export company. It was the trips especially to Hungary that acquainted him with Budapest and informed him of the increasingly dangerous situation that Jews faced all across Europe under Hitler's reign of terror. He didn't know at the time, but his unique set of skills, circumstances, connections, and convictions would soon put him at the forefront of the most audacious rescue missions of World War II. In March 1944, the Nazis occupied Hungary and began preparing to deport the country's Jews with ruthless efficiency. Adolf Eichmann, the SS officer tasked with implementing the final solution, arrived in Budapest to oversee the deportation and extermination of Hungary's 800,000 Jews. Over 400,000 had already been sent to the gas chambers of Auschwitz-Birkenau in 3 months. It wouldn't be a different story for the remaining 200,000 Jews in Budapest. It was into this desperate situation that Wallenberg arrived in Budapest on July 9, 1944. He was sent by the U.S. War Refugee Board and the Swedish government as first secretary to the Swedish legation. It was clear he lacked diplomatic experience at 31. But Wallenberg devised a daring plan to save as many Jews as he could. He did this by leveraging Sweden's neutrality and his charisma and connections. Time was running out as Eichmann pressed forward with his campaign of mass murder. Wallenberg was the final flicker of hope for the Jews in Budapest. Even though the risks were enormous, Wallenberg did not hesitate. Every hour counted as the trains continued to roll towards Auschwitz. This was Budapest's darkest hour, and a man with no experience in diplomacy or clandestine operations became the city's best hope for salvation. Wallenberg wasted no time upon his arrival in Budapest. He immediately ordered the printing of protective Swedish passports called Schutzpasses, and he began distributing them to Jews, granting them diplomatic immunity. Although initially allotted just 1,500 passes, through skillful forgeries and persuasion, he was able to issue thousands more, potentially saving up to 20,000 Jews from deportation. Next, Wallenberg established over 30 safe houses across the city, declaring them annexes of the Swedish legation and thus off-limits to Hungarian and German authorities. He emblazoned the buildings with massive Swedish flags and the triple crowns of Sweden's coat of arms, using this display of official protection to shield thousands more Jews from capture and death. As many as 15,000 Jews found refuge in these safe houses by the end of the war. Perhaps his most astonishing feats of rescue came in the final chaotic months of 1944, as the noose tightened around Budapest's Jews. In October, Eichmann initiated a series of death marches, forcing thousands of starving, frostbitten Jews to march west towards Austria and certain death. Wallenberg pursued the marchers in his car, distributing Schutzpasses, food, and medicine. When the Nazis refused to let protected Jews go, Wallenberg threatened to have them prosecuted for war crimes, demonstrating a breathtaking boldness in the face of heavily armed killers. Even as the Soviet Red Army laid siege to Budapest in December, Wallenberg's rescue work continued unabated. As the city devolved into chaos, roving bands of pro-Nazi Arrow Cross militiamen combed the streets for Jews to rob and murder. Wallenberg confronted these death squads with a fierce determination, standing them down through a combination of bribery, threats, and sheer bluffing. At times, his methods were unorthodox, such as when he leaped atop a train bound for Auschwitz and began frantically handing out protective passes to those inside until forced to jump off at gunpoint. He also employed hundreds of Jewish volunteers to staff his expanding operations, giving them a renewed sense of purpose and resolve in the face of annihilation. Wallenberg was able to save tens of thousands of lives through fearlessness and genius. He cemented his status as the Angel of Budapest. His achievements were all the more remarkable given the obstacles he faced. An entrenched Nazi bureaucracy was not an easy pass. A fascist Hungarian regime was also a tall climb. Here's a man who was able to pull off one of the largest rescue operations in the history of the Holocaust. Wallenberg's heroic actions came at immense personal risk. He was constantly in danger, targeted by Eichmann himself and hunted by Arrow Cross assassins. Yet he was undeterred, telling his colleagues, "I'd never be able to go back to Stockholm without knowing I'd done all a man could do to save as many Jews as possible." Tragically, Wallenberg would never see Stockholm again. On January 17, 1945, he was called to the headquarters of the Soviet forces liberating Budapest for unclear reasons. He was accompanied by a Soviet escort, but was never seen again. Till today, no one knows how he disappeared. What exactly happened remains unknown. 12 years later, the Soviets would claim that a prisoner named Wallenberg had died of a heart attack in Moscow's Lubyanka prison in 1947. The issue was that there was no proof. Countless eyewitnesses in Soviet prisons continued for decades. This suggests he may have still been alive. The relentless efforts by his family and international investigators couldn't ascertain the full truth of his fate. The most plausible explanation was that Wallenberg was arrested by Soviet forces. This was based on available evidence and testimony. The forces may have suspected him of being a spy. He was then transported to Moscow and was likely interrogated, imprisoned, and ultimately executed. The date and circumstances of his death remain unconfirmed. The Soviets refused to provide a credible account of his fate. Reports of sightings in the Gulag system years later have fueled decades of speculation and investigation. The thing is, none of these have yielded definitive answers. Wallenberg's legacy is well established despite the fact that the mystery lingers. He is recognized as one of the greatest heroes of the 20th century for his staggering humanitarian achievements. Streets and monuments from Budapest to Buenos Aires bear his name. Israel granted him honorary citizenship and named him one of the righteous among the nations. It is the highest honor given to non-Jews who rescued Jews during the Holocaust. He became just the second person bestowed honorary American citizenship by an act of Congress in the U.S. Wallenberg's monumental courage and self-sacrifice in the face of the greatest evil of modern history is the very best of humanity on display. Raoul proved that one individual with determination and moral clarity can fight back against seemingly insurmountable hatred and save the lives of tens of thousands. His example continues to inspire new generations to act with compassion and boldness in the ongoing battle for human rights. His own life was cut short, but the impact of his selfless actions is here to stay. Raoul Wallenberg was one of the most courageous and effective humanitarians the world has ever known. He single-handedly saved up to 100,000 Hungarian Jews from Nazi extermination near the end of World War II. His own life was tragically cut short, but the lives of those he rescued and their hundreds of thousands of descendants speak of his towering moral achievement. Wallenberg's story remains a shining reminder that in the face of even the most intractable opposition, one dedicated individual can defend human rights and human lives on a vast scale.